If I told you that the greatest threat to losing your independence after 70 is not your age, but one quiet habit that builds over many years, would you believe me? I did not believe it myself until life forced me to face a truth I had spent decades explaining to other people, but had somehow ignored in my own home. Please stay with me, because what I am about to share is not a promise of miracles or a shortcut to perfect health. It is the story of how I found hope when I believed I was slowly walking toward the same painful ending that had already taken away someone I loved. My name is Eleanor Bennett. I am 98 years old, and this morning I woke up without anyone helping me. I made my own breakfast, watered the flowers outside my kitchen window, swept the front porch, and smiled because every ordinary morning has become a precious gift to me. When my grandchildren visit, they laugh because they still find fresh bread cooling on my table and soup quietly simmering on the stove. They often ask how I have managed to stay in my own home while so many of my friends lost that freedom years ago. The answer is much deeper than any single food or medicine. It began almost 20 years ago with a conversation that changed the direction of my life forever. At that time, I had already spent many years teaching medicine, yet the white coat hanging in my closet could not protect me from hearing words that frightened me more than I expected. After a routine examination, my doctor looked at me with kind eyes and gently explained that I had developed type 2 diabetes. I remember walking back to my car feeling strangely quiet. I was not afraid of the diagnosis itself. I was afraid of what I had already seen this illness do to my older brother Henry. Little by little, he ignored the early warning signs, convinced that tomorrow would always be another chance to take better care of himself. Tomorrow kept arriving until one day it did not. First, he needed a cane, then, he needed help climbing stairs, and finally, he spent his last years in a care facility far from the garden he had loved all his life. Every visit broke my heart because I could still see the strong young man he had once been behind those tired eyes. As I drove home after one particularly difficult visit, I made myself a promise that I have never forgotten. But I had no idea that the first lesson waiting for me would completely change the way I looked at food, aging, and the quiet decisions we make every single day. I could not stop thinking about Henry. Every morning I saw his face before I even poured my first cup of tea, and every evening I wondered whether I was quietly following the same road without realizing it. The hardest part was that my brother had never believed anything serious was happening. He often said he felt a little tired because he was getting older. He laughed when people mentioned changing his meals, and he always promised that he would start taking better care of himself after the holidays, after the family gathering, after one more busy season. Those tomorrows slowly disappeared. Watching him lose his confidence hurt even more than watching him lose his strength. I remember the last walk we took together before he needed a wheelchair. We barely reached the end of his garden, and he stopped to catch his breath. He smiled so I would not worry, but I could see the sadness hiding behind his eyes. That memory stayed with me long after he was gone. When my own diagnosis arrived, I knew I could not simply hope for a different ending while living the same way. My doctor noticed that I was frightened, and instead of speaking to me with difficult medical words, he picked up a pencil and drew a simple picture on a sheet of paper. He said, "Imagine your body as a house, Eleanor. Sugar is like firewood waiting outside the door, and insulin is the person carrying that wood inside, where it can keep the home warm. But after many years, the door becomes harder to open. The person keeps working harder, yet more and more wood stays outside." That simple picture stayed with me because I finally understood that my body was not trying to betray me. It was struggling to do a job that had slowly become more difficult over time. He gently explained that our goal was not to fear every bite of food or spend the rest of my life feeling punished at the dinner table. Instead, We would look for ways that might help my body use its energy more smoothly, while continuing my regular medical care and checking my blood sugar together. That conversation gave me something I had almost lost during those frightening weeks. It gave me hope. Still, I kept asking myself one question. If food could become part of the problem, could ordinary food also become part of the support? I did not know that the very first change I would make at breakfast would surprise me more than anything I had learned during my years in medicine, and it would open the door to 9 more discoveries that I never expected. The next morning, I stood in my kitchen looking at the breakfast I had eaten for years: toast with jam, a glass of orange juice, and something sweet to keep me company while I read the newspaper. For the first time, I did not see comfort. I saw a habit that deserved a gentle question. Was this meal truly helping me begin the day with steady energy? Or had I simply been repeating it because it was familiar? My doctor had suggested trying something different, not as a punishment, but as an experiment that we would watch together over time. So I prepared 2 eggs and half an avocado instead. I remember smiling because it looked almost too simple to matter. Yet over the following weeks, I noticed something unexpected. I no longer felt that strong urge to search for a sweet snack before lunchtime. My mornings became calmer, and although my blood sugar still required careful monitoring with my doctor, I felt as if my body had stopped racing against itself. That small change made me curious. If one ordinary breakfast could make me feel different, what other simple foods had I overlooked throughout my life? I began asking older people everywhere I traveled about their favorite meals. A woman from Greece laughed and told me she had never feared olive oil. A gentleman from Japan smiled as he described small portions, vegetables, and fish shared slowly with family. An elderly neighbor who had just celebrated her 95th birthday quietly stirred chia seeds into her yogurt every morning. She told me she liked how they helped her feel satisfied for longer, and I later discovered that researchers continue studying how fiber-rich foods may help support steadier blood sugar after meals. Another friend introduced me to fenugreek seeds. I had never paid attention to them before. She soaked a small spoonful overnight and added them to her breakfast, because that was how her mother had done it for decades. I did not expect much, yet I found myself fascinated by how many long-lived people valued simple, inexpensive foods instead of expensive products with impressive labels. Around the same time, lentil soup became a regular visitor to my kitchen. I had always enjoyed it during winter, but now I appreciated it in a completely different way. The combination of fiber and plant protein helped me feel comfortably full, and many researchers continue exploring how meals like these may support a steadier rise in blood sugar compared with more refined carbohydrates. Still, something puzzled me. Even after making these changes, I sensed that food alone could not explain why some people remain joyful, energetic, and independent well into their 90s, while others seem to lose hope much earlier. That question stayed with me every evening, and one quiet conversation with a widowed neighbor would soon reveal an answer I had never expected to hear. My neighbor Margaret never spoke loudly, yet somehow every conversation with her stayed in my mind for weeks. One afternoon, we sat together on her porch while the sun slowly disappeared behind the old oak trees. She looked at me and asked a question that caught me completely by surprise. "Eleanor," she said, "why do so many people wait until they lose something before they decide it was worth protecting?" I did not answer right away because I knew she was not talking only about health. She had watched friends lose their strength, their confidence, and sometimes even the simple joy of walking to the corner store. Many of them believed the answer was to remove more and more foods from their plates. They lived in constant fear of every meal. I understood that fear because I had felt it myself after my diagnosis. Yet I slowly discovered that living in fear made every breakfast feel like an examination instead of a blessing. My doctor kept reminding me that our goal was never to chase perfection. We wanted steady progress, careful monitoring, and thoughtful choices that fit naturally into everyday life. That simple idea changed everything. Instead of asking, "What must I never eat again?" I began asking, "What nourishing foods can I gently add to this meal?" That small change in thinking opened a new door. I started sprinkling a little Ceylon cinnamon over my morning oatmeal from time to time, because some studies suggest it may help support the body's normal response to insulin when included as part of a balanced diet. Before larger meals, I occasionally enjoyed a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar diluted in a full glass of water, because researchers continue studying whether it may help slow the rise of blood sugar after eating for some people. I always discussed these changes with my doctor and continued taking every medication exactly as prescribed. I never wanted simple kitchen habits to replace proper medical care. They were companions, not substitutes. Then I welcomed more fatty fish onto my table, especially salmon and sardines, and replaced afternoon cookies with a small handful of walnuts. Later, I discovered broccoli sprouts, which fascinated me because researchers continue exploring their natural plant compounds and how they may support healthy metabolism. None of these foods transformed my life overnight. What they did was encourage me to build one gentle habit after another until they became part of who I was. Looking back, I realize the greatest mistake many people make is believing that one magical food will solve everything. My own experience taught me something very different. Real change often begins quietly, almost invisibly, until one ordinary morning you suddenly realize you have more energy, more confidence, and a little more hope than you had before. But even after my kitchen changed, I still carried a heavy sadness inside me, and I was about to learn that no meal, however nourishing, could heal that part of my life on its own. After my husband Thomas passed away, the house became painfully quiet. For many months, I believed the silence was the hardest thing I had ever carried. I still prepared 2 cups of tea by mistake, only realizing what I had done when I reached for the second cup. There were mornings when even the healthiest breakfast tasted empty because I had no one sitting across the table. It was during that lonely season that I finally understood something I had overlooked for years. Good food may help support the body, but the heart also needs nourishment. I began noticing that the older people who stayed active well into their 90s often shared something beyond their eating habits. They had a reason to wake up each morning. One gentleman repaired bicycles for neighborhood children. A widow knitted blankets for newborn babies at the local hospital. Another friend read stories at the public library every Thursday afternoon. None of them spoke about living forever. They simply lived with purpose. Around that same time, I started helping a young family next door whose little boy struggled with his schoolwork. Every Tuesday afternoon, we sat together at my kitchen table with books spread across the surface. Those hours slowly changed both of us. I smiled more often, slept more peacefully, and felt eager to plan tomorrow instead of worrying about it. My doctor often reminded me that stress can influence blood sugar, and many researchers continue studying the connection between emotional well-being and overall metabolic health. I could not measure the effect of kindness on a laboratory report, yet I noticed that the days filled with laughter and meaningful conversations seemed gentler in every possible way. Looking back across nearly a century, I have also seen another common habit among people who remained independent. They rarely rushed through their meals. They sat down, chewed slowly, enjoyed simple ingredients, and treated eating as a moment of gratitude instead of another task to finish quickly. I began doing the same. Even a bowl of lentil soup or grilled salmon with vegetables felt different when I allowed myself to slow down. Those quiet moments reminded me that caring for myself was not selfish. It was the very thing that allowed me to continue caring for others. As my confidence returned, I also spent more time with young doctors at the university where I occasionally volunteered. They often brought me the latest research, while I shared stories that could never be found in medical journals. Together, we discovered that wisdom often grows where science and lived experience meet with humility. Yet one lesson remained above every other, and it was not hidden inside any cookbook or research paper. It was a lesson about forgiveness that completely transformed the way I experienced aging, and without it, I believe none of the changes in my kitchen would have felt complete. The older I became, the more I realized that good habits do not have to be complicated to be meaningful. They only need to be repeated with patience. If someone asked me today where I would begin after receiving a diagnosis like mine, I would not hand them a long list of strict rules. I would simply invite them to look at one ordinary day and gently ask whether there is room for one small improvement. Perhaps breakfast could include eggs with avocado instead of a pastry. Perhaps lentils could appear on the dinner table once or twice a week. Perhaps a handful of walnuts could replace an afternoon sweet. Maybe broccoli sprouts could become a fresh topping for a salad, or a little chia could find its way into plain yogurt. None of these changes guarantee a particular result, and every person is different, which is why I believe they should always be discussed with a healthcare professional, especially for anyone living with type 2 diabetes or taking medication that affects blood sugar. Throughout my own journey, I continued visiting my doctor regularly, checking my blood sugar, and adjusting my eating habits only with medical guidance. I never stopped my prescribed medicines on my own because I understood that thoughtful nutrition and proper medical care work best as partners rather than competitors. Over time, I also learned to appreciate simple routines that cost almost nothing. I tried to take a gentle walk after meals whenever the weather invited me outside. I drank enough water during the day instead of waiting until I felt thirsty. I made sure my evenings became quieter, giving myself time to read, pray, or simply sit by the window instead of carrying the worries of the day into bed. Many people noticed that peaceful evenings often led to calmer mornings, and I often wondered whether the body quietly thanks us for those moments of rest in ways we cannot always measure. Looking back now, I do not remember the exact day when I began feeling stronger. There was no dramatic turning point. Instead, there were hundreds of ordinary mornings that slowly built a different life. One breakfast became another, one peaceful walk became another, one kind conversation became another, until healthy choices no longer felt like work. They simply became part of who I was. Yet if you asked me today which single decision made the greatest difference, I would surprise you with my answer, because it was not hidden in my kitchen at all. It was hidden inside my heart. And that final lesson is the one I hope you will carry with you long after this story comes to an end. When I think back to the frightened woman who sat alone in her car nearly 20 years ago after hearing the words type 2 diabetes, I almost feel as if I am remembering someone else. She believed that losing her independence was only a matter of time. She believed that her future had already been written because she had watched her beloved brother Henry slowly lose his own. Yet this morning I opened my curtains, prepared my breakfast, watered my flowers, and smiled at another ordinary day. That is why I wanted to tell you my story. Not because I discovered a miracle, and certainly not because I found one magical food that changed everything. My life changed because hundreds of small decisions slowly began moving in the same direction. I learned to choose foods that helped me feel satisfied instead of deprived. I learned to work together with my doctor instead of trying to solve everything alone. I continued checking my blood sugar regularly, taking my prescribed treatment exactly as recommended, and making careful adjustments only under medical supervision. Over time, I also discovered that peace of mind, Forgiveness and purpose were just as important as anything growing in my garden or resting on my kitchen table. After Thomas passed away, I thought loneliness would define the rest of my life. Instead, helping my neighbors, encouraging young doctors, and listening to my grandchildren gave me a new reason to wake up every morning with gratitude instead of fear. If there is one lesson I hope you remember, it is this: your age does not decide whether today is worth caring for yourself. Today decides that. Perhaps you cannot change every habit overnight, but maybe you can prepare one healthier breakfast tomorrow morning. Maybe you can take a gentle walk, call someone you love, forgive an old hurt, or plant the first seed of a better routine. Those small moments have a quiet power that is easy to underestimate until years pass and you realize they have built an entirely different life. I truly believe it is never too late to begin treating your body and your heart with kindness. Before we say goodbye, I would love to know something about you. Please tell me your age and the country where you are watching from, because I always enjoy seeing how many wonderful places this little community reaches. If you have your own simple habit that helps you feel healthier or happier, share it in the comments so we can all learn from one another. And if my story brought you even a little hope today, please subscribe to the channel. I would be honored to continue sharing the gentle lessons that nearly a century of life has placed in my hands.